Shabbat shalom, everyone. Apologies for the slightly late start, just keeping up the KLS habit of being a few minutes late. So it's really nice to be actually in the synagogue for a change. And so Vince and I will be sharing this morning's service. He'll be doing quite a lot because he's doing the music and the laning and giving the sermon. And with that, we will be beginning on Shabbat morning service number 5 on page 129 with Ma Tovu. And just for anyone who doesn't know Vince and I, you'll see us at some point standing rather close together. We do live in the same house, so for anyone who isn't aware of that, we will just tell you that's why.
Legally.
We live in the same house. We could live in the same house any way we wanted.
Yeah.
It's legal.
Off we go.
Going to apologize that my technology won't allow me to actually see what's happening on Facebook. So I have no way of seeing who's joined, so I can't really welcome all of you personally. So that's why I'm not. Forgive us for that. Neither of us can manage. On the bottom of 129, source of light, of truth, and of the impulse within us towards justice and mercy. May this hour of worship be one of vision and inspiration. Help us to find knowledge by which to live. Let the words we speak enter our hearts and influence our lives. Bless all who enter this sanctuary in search of you, or in fact, not entering the sanctuary, but bless all who join us today from wherever they are, in search of you or in need of comfort and consolation. May the offering of their hearts be acceptable to you, and may the prayers we utter today bear fruit in acts of kindness, peace, and love. On the top of page 130. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asoch b'divrei Torah. And we look today at the words of Micah the prophet. We're going to continue responsively. With what shall I approach the Eternal One? How shall I worship the God of heaven? Shall I come before God with burnt offerings or with yearly calves? Will God be pleased with thousands of rams?
Or with 10,000 rivers of oil?
Should I give my firstborn for my transgressions?
The fruit of my body for the sins of my soul?
People tell you what is good, but what does the Eternal One require of you?
Only to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God.
These are actions which bring benefit here and now, but whose value can be measured only in the light of eternity. Honoring one's father and mother, acts of love and kindness, diligent pursuit of knowledge and wisdom, hospitality to strangers, visiting the sick, enabling bride and groom to rejoice, consoling the bereaved, praying with sincerity, and making peace where there is strife. And the study of Torah leads to them all.
Eternal God, may the words of Torah taste sweet to us and to all Israel, that we and our children and all the children of your people may come to know you by studying Torah.
We praise you, O God, teacher of your people, Israel. On the top of 132, Baruch she'amar v'haya haolam, Baruch hu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamecholal b'fi amo, mishubach u'mefoar b'lashon chasidav v'yavadav, b'shfachot u'zmerot negadelecha v'namlichecha, malkeinu yachid chei ha'olamim. Baruch atah Adonai melech mecholal b'tishbachot. And we're going to turn back in our Sidurim to page 120 for Psalm 92, Mizmor Shir Le'yom HaShabbat.
Mizmor Shir Le'yom HaShabbat, Toledol Adonai, Ulazameh l'Shimcha Elyon, Ulazameh l'Shimcha Elyon, L'hagi b'bochech chasdecha, V'emunacha b'leilot, Alei asor Adonai b'fo alecha, Masei yadecha aranein, Magadu masech Adonai, ve'olam kum akshavotecha. ולעזר לשמך עליון.
And we continue on the bottom of page 133, continuing on with this thought of, with the idea of being grateful and giving thanks. How shall I sing of day and night when it is God who formed them? How shall I sing of heaven and earth when it is God who founded them? How shall I sing of mountains and hills when it is God who planted them? How shall I sing of deserts and seas when it is God who begot them? How shall I sing of earth and her fullness when it is God who bade them be? I shall sing of the one who fashioned them all, the one who is above them all, of God, God alone, I shall sing. Psalm 150.
Hallelujah, Bakasho, Hallelujah, Kiauzo, Hallelujah, Bigorota, Hallelujah, Karogulo, Kohan Shamana, Hallelujah, 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 Kohan Shamana, Hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, take a shofar, hallelujah, never vakino, hallelujah, tofu makol, hallelujah, mini vugav, kohan shamata, hallelujah, hallelujah, kohan shamata, hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 Zilzle Shama, hallelujah, Zilzle Trua, Kohan Shamata, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Before we continue with the next section of our service, I'd like to reflect a bit on what the first part of the Shabbat morning service really is all about. And so we opened with Matovu, and we continued because traditionally, for us as Jews, we're always looking at words of Torah, at words of teaching. So continuing with the words of Micah, which I think of, which to me are very important. It reminds us that it's not that our worship, it's not the acts of worship, but it's what those acts of worship lead us to do. Just to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. And then the next section reminding us, which I thought was particularly important during this time when we're in lockdown again, and even though, and we're not even sure when that will end or what the restrictions will be when we come out of it, the reminder that acts of love and kindness, hospitality to strangers, visiting the sick, consoling the bereaved, that all of these things are so important in our daily life. They're not just words in the Siddur, and that's why they're there, is to remind us that they are part of our daily life. And then the other thing that we have done in this preliminary service, which is traditional, is use a couple of psalms, the psalm for the Sabbath day, and then Psalm 150, which were the traditional ways of beginning, of warming ourselves up, getting ready to pray. And so now we go on to the more formal sections of our morning prayer. On page 135, you can either stand or remain seated as you wish. Yishtabach Shemcha La'ad Malkeinu, Ha'el HaMelech HaKadol VaHaKadosh B'Shamayim UVa'aretz, Ki Lacha Na'eh Adonai Eloheinu V'Elohei Avotenu, Shiru Shvacha Halel V'Zimra, Borachot V'Horaot, V'Ata V'Yad Olam, Baruch Atah Adonai, Habocher B'Shirei Zimra. We join in the call to formal public worship.
La 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 la
seats. And we're now coming on to two sections which precede the Shema. And the first is about, again, carrying on a thought about God as creator, maker of light, creator of darkness, the cycles of the universe. And the second paragraph is about God's love for us. And we're going to, with the first paragraph, we're going to use a little song.
Shalom u'varei hakol. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day, day turns to night. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day, day turns to night.
Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer HaMeorot. We praise you, O God, creator of light. We continue. Great is your love for us, eternal God, and abundant your compassion. Our ancestors trusted in you, and you taught them the laws of life. So be gracious to us and teach us. Incline our hearts to hear your words, to know and understand, to learn and teach, and with love to uphold the truths of your Torah. Enlighten us with your teaching. Make us faithful to your commandments and wholehearted in the love and awe of your name. For in love you summon us to serve you and proclaim your unity. We praise you, O God. In love you have called your people Israel to serve you. Please stand or sit as is your custom.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ed. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol meodecha. V'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha. V'shirantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha v'vitecha v'vlechtecha v'derech v'shotbecha v'kumecha v'kshartam le'ot al yadecha v'hayu le'totafot b'einecha v'ktavtam al mezuzot betecha v'visharecha.
למען תזכרו, ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. Ani Adonai Elohim.
Good and beautiful and true, sound, established and enduring are these words now and forever. True it is, Eternal One, that you are a sovereign God and Redeemer. as you were the God and Redeemer of our ancestors. You are our Maker, the rock of our salvation. We have known you always as our helper and our liberator. There is no God but you. Truly you are first and you are last. We have no Redeemer but you. You redeemed us from Egypt and freed us from the house of bondage. Then with great joy, Moses, Miriam, and all Israel together sang to you this song.
Mi hamocha elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedav hakodesh norah tehilot oseh.
שירה חדשה שבכל גאולים, לשמך שפת הים, יחד כולם, הודו והמליכו ואמרו.
אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. אדוני ימלוך לעולם. Israel, Kol Ezrat Israel, Koleinu, Adonai Tzevaot Shemo, Kadosh Israel, Baruch atah Adonai, Kol Israel.
On page 140, we join in the tefillah, the Amidah, often called the standing prayer. Please stand or sit as you wish.
Adonai sefatai tiftach, ufi agi tehilatecha. Eternal God, open my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, V'Zocher Chazdei Avot v'Imachot, U'Mevi Gulal Livnei V'neihem, L'Ma'an Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, Ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Chayyei Metim Atah, Rab L'Hoshia, Mashiv HaRuach, U'Morid HaGeshem, Mazriach HaShemesh, U'Morid HaTal.
Machachel Chaim b'chesed, Chayyei Metim b'rachayim rabim, Zomek noflim v'rofei cholim, U'matir asurim, U'mekayem emunato l'shenei afar. Mi hamocha ba'al geburot, u'medom elach, melech meimit u'mechayeh, u'matzmiach Yeshua.
B'nei amanata l'chachayot metim, Baruch atah Adonai, Chayyei hametim.
Mekadesh et shimcha ba'olam, שם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב היה נביאך, היה נביאך, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוא הארץ, כבודו.
כבודו מלא עולם.
ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו.
ממקומך מלכנו תופיע, ותמלוך עלינו, כי מחכים אנחנו לך.
ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון, לדור דור. הללויה. לדור דור, לדור דור, לדור דור נגיד גר לך. נצחים, ולנצח נצחים, קדושתך, קדושתך נקדיש. ולנצח נצחים, ולנצח נצחים, קדושתך, קדושתך נקדיש. דור ודור, דור ודור, דור ודור, נגיד גר לך. דור ודור, דור ודור, דור ודור, נגיד גר לך. אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש, לא ימוש לעולם ועד. לשבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש, לא ימוש לעולם ועד.
ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש. Resume our seats if we've been standing. Continue on the bottom of 142. You inspired our ancestors to hallow this day for your service. When upon its coming we pause to contemplate our life, we learn anew that we do not live by bread alone, but also by the spiritual nourishment we receive when we open ourselves to your influence. We thank you for the Sabbath day and for the opportunity it offers to enhance the quality of our lives. We thank you for its joy and for its peace. May our worship help us to take into our hearts its message of holiness and consecrate all our days by devotion to what is true, beautiful, and good.
ישמחו במלכותך, ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי שבת וקוראי עונג, מקדשי שביעי, המקדשי שביעי, כולם ישבו ויתענגו מטובך, והשביעי, והשביעי, רצית בו וקידשתו, עמדת ימים, אותו קראת, ליל המעשה בראשית. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, רוצה במנוחתנו, קדשנו במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך. צווינו מטובך, ושמחנו בישועתך. ותהל בינו, לעבדך באמת. והנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה וברצון. שבת קודשך, שבת קודשך. Vayanuchu Israel, Vayanuchu Israel, Makadeshei Shemecha.
Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat.
Ratzei Adonai Eloheinu, Ha'amecha Yisrael, U'tefilatan Tekabel. Tamid avodat Yisrael, Amecha, Yisrael Amecha. Baruch atah Adonai Shodecha le'olecha b'ri'ah na'or.
We give thanks that you, Eternal One, are our God, as you are the God of our ancestors. You are the rock of our life, the power that shields us in every age. We thank and praise you for our lives, which are in your hand, for our souls, which are in your keeping, for the signs of your presence we encounter every day, and for your wondrous gifts at all times, morning, noon, and night. We praise you, O God, source of goodness, to whom our thanks are due.
Sim shalom tova ubracha, sim shalom tova ubracha, hein v'chesed v'rachamim. Sim shalom tova ubracha, sim shalom tova ubracha, hein v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu ve'al kol Israel amecha sim shalom aleinu ve'al kol yoshvei tevel sim shalom, sim shalom tova ubracha, sim shalom tova ubracha, ein v'chesed v'rachamim.
Baruch atah Adonai, Osei HaShalom. We praise you, O God, the source of peace. We take a few moments now for our own silent prayers.
Shall we take light of this one?
Yeah.
Oh, may the words of my mouth, the meditation of my heart, be acceptable before you, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Oh, say shalom bimromah. Oh, yeah, say shalom aleinu. Oh, Israel. Oh, b'nei Adam. Amen.
And we're going to continue now with our reading of Torah, and that will be on page 490. Craig very kindly emailed me all of the comments, so it really is very, very nice to see everyone and everyone commenting. And I'm just going to tell you a little secret, because I'm standing here and because so many of you often sit in the same places in the synagogue. I can actually see you in my mind sitting out here, even when I'm looking at your names, commenting on the Facebook page. So, yeah, that's really nice. Thank you for being here virtually. Assemble the people, men, women, and children, and the strangers in your cities, to hear and learn to revere the Eternal One, your God, and observe faithfully all the precepts of this Torah, and that their children who do not yet know it hear, that they too may learn to revere the Eternal One, your God.
ודבק לבנו במצוותיך, ויחד לבבינו באהבה וביראה את שמך.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonai, Gadol Shemo.
Galul Adonai iti, uneromema Shemo Yachtav.
Echad Adonai Gadol Adonai Tiferet, Vanetzach V'achod. Ki kol b'shamayim u'aretz, ki kol b'shamayim u'aretz. L'cha Adonai ha'mamlecha, v'hamitnaseh l'chol rosh. First, I've got to find the portion. And Renee very kindly set the scroll for today. And I found it. Thank you, Renee.
That's good.
Just check that I found the right spot. Yep. Uh-huh. You're already here. I'm going to call Janet to the Torah. I'm just asking her to step back a bit so she can actually come to the Torah. Ta'amod Yehudit Rachel bat Abraham v'Sarah Morenu Harav al HaTorah.
And where is it started? Baruch hu et Adonai hamvarach. Baruch Adonai hamvarach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen. Let's start with an English translation. We're reading from Genesis 23, the start of that chapter. The portion is called Chayyei Sarah, Sarah's life, which is usually translated as the death of Sarah, but we'll bear with that. And in English, we've got Sarah lived 127 years. That's the years of Sarah's life. Then Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went on to mourn for Sarah and weep for her. Then Abraham stood up from before his dead and spoke to the Hittites, saying, I'm a stranger and a foreigner among you. Give me property for a burying place among you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. So the Hittites answered Abraham, Hear us, O Lord, you are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold from you his burial place, so you may bury your dead. And that's what I'll be reading in Hebrew. And perhaps with an excess of ambition, I decided to try and lane it. V'chayu Chayyei Sarah me'al shana v'ezrim shana v'sheva shanim shnei Chayyei Sarah v'tamat Sarah. Do you hear the change of mood for the words that say, then Sarah died? V'tamat Sarah b'kiryat Arba u'Hebron b'eretz Canaan. Vayachom Abraham Lispor l'Sarah livchota Vayakom Abraham me'al pnei meto me'al pnei meto Vayadaber el bnei chet Le'amor Kevato shav anochi imcha Tunu li. Sorry, I've been corrected. Kevato shav anochi imakem Tenuli achuzat kever imachem V'ekravara meti milfanai. Vayanu b'nei Chet et Avraham lamo lo. Shemaenu Adonai, Nasi Elohim, Ata b'tochenu, b'mimracha b'varenu, ro et metecha, ish mimenu et karo, lo yikle mimcha, michavo metecha.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayyei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai notei haTorah.
And now Hagbar, in which the scroll is displayed so that the congregation can check that the correct law, the correct words have been read. But you've all got it on screen, so Hagbar becomes a less urgent matter. Nevertheless, oh, that's too heavy.
Too heavy. Sit down with it.
Romemo Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu l'hakol sho. Romemo Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu l'hakol sho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemo. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemo. This is the point at which you might get a haftarah to distract you whilst the scroll is being dressed. But we're going to dispense with that. So it could be time for making a cup of tea, but this won't take very long.
That's right.
This wonderful example of husband and wife cooperation. Good.
Don't get in a hurry.
I've just been stabbed with the yard.
You're lifting up top. Okay. So we're going to return the, first of all, we're going to stand for the community prayers. I know Vince would like to get it put away, but he's going to have to stand from now on. Eternal God, whose dominion embraces the universe, we ask your blessing for our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth, and all the royal family, for those who govern our country and all who influence the quality of its national life. Make them conscious of their responsibility and teach them to exercise it in accordance with your will. May we all work together to fashion in this country a society that excels in freedom and justice, acceptance and compassion, so that it may be a force for righteousness and peace in the life of humanity. May the one who blessed our ancestors bless all our brothers and sisters of the house of Israel who enter synagogues to pray and to give aid to those in need. May the Holy One, to whom all praise is due, hear their prayers and help them to fulfill their aspirations for good. Eternal God, our rock and redeemer, grant blessing to the state of Israel, created to fulfill an age-old dream and to be a haven for the oppressed. Inspire its leaders and citizens with faithfulness to the aims of its founders, to develop the land for the benefit of all its inhabitants, and to implement the prophetic ideals of liberty and justice. May they live in harmony with one another and in peace with their neighbors, and cause to come true once more the ancient vision that out of Zion shall go forth Torah and the word of God from Jerusalem. Yahalelu et Shem Adonai, ki nizgav shemo levado. Sermon.
Oh, sermon, all right.
Just going to say, I think Vincent's done something very, very interesting with the Torah reading today by way of a sermon. So I hope you find it interesting. It's not your usual sermon.
Thank you. KLS keeps trying new things, and they work only if we call upon the services of our technical wizard and chair, Craig, who sat over there like Captain Kirk on the deck of the Starship Enterprise. And hopefully he has enough technology with him to show you some slides. And I will begin with a slide that actually shows what is claimed to be the burial site of Sarah and later of Abraham and his family. As we read in Torah, located in Hebron. So, what to make of a Torah reading that's focused on death and burial? Abraham's desire to have a burial ground for his family was one of his first acts after arriving in a new land. And that evident priority finds an echo in the history of Jewish communities around the globe. I've got an example. By way of example, Congregation Bet Elohim, which is in Charleston, South Carolina, is one of the oldest Jewish congregations in the US. Not chosen at random. I've picked some places where Janet and I have actually seen the burial places, the cemeteries. This congregation was founded in 1749 by Sephardi Jews moving northwards from Latin America and the Caribbean. Then, little more than a decade later, 1762, they had acquired their burial ground, which by now, and you're looking at it, is on the United States Register of Historic Places. Even in the American Wild West, and we have a slide to prove it, even in the American Wild West, Jews wanted their own burial ground. Now, you probably know that Tombstone in Arizona was the location for the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral. And it had a cemetery called Boot Hill, because in those times, in that Wild West, it was rare for anyone to die peacefully and bootless in their bed. They got buried with their boots on. But it's less well known that just to the side of Boot Hill was a Jewish cemetery. And the slide you're looking at shows a memorial to those Jewish pioneers of the Wild West. The memorial is on the borders of their cemetery. I couldn't find on the internet a picture of the cemetery itself, and although we've got some at home, they are taken so long ago that it would be difficult to get them updated to the internet, so I'm sorry about that. Anyway, you can see that this memorial involves a large number of rock fragments. Is this a reflection of Tombstone's business as a silver mining boom town? Or is it a reflection of the habit that Jews have of placing a stone whenever they visit a grave? Strange thing to do. The origins of the practice of leaving a stone when visiting a grave are not clearly known. It could be that before coffins came into common use, bodies were wrapped in cloth and given shallow burial. Well, then covering a grave with stones was a practical defence against disturbance by animals. And also the stones served to mark the location of the grave, which was important for the Kohanim, the priesthood, because they did not want to become ritually impure by accidentally coming too close to where a body was buried. There's a midrash attaching to this custom of placing a stone. And the midrash is based on the similarity between the Hebrew word for pebble and the Hebrew word for a bond. And then we can say that leaving a stone on a grave is a declaration of a bond with the deceased. So there's some American cemeteries, some American burial places, and I think you recognise that the graves in the Jewish cemetery in Charleston with their vertical tombstones are very similar to what we see, very similar to the commonplace European practice. And that practice has been established in Europe for ages. The next slide shows you a very old Jewish graveyard. It's the old Jewish cemetery in Prague. People were buried here from 1439
Been there too.
to 1787. It's estimated that around some 100,000 bodies are buried here, and it's not a big place. How did they manage that? Well, whatever they filled up, they carted in another layer of earth and started all over again. So in places, the bodies in this cemetery are 12 deep, and you can see the resulting forest of tombstones. Wherever there's space for a grave, there's up to 12 people buried there. That's the European style of gravestones, and not all Jewish cemeteries mark their graves with vertical tombstones. The next slide shows the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, the cemetery there. And you can see those tombstones if you look closely, but they're laying flat on the graves. And moving quickly to the next slide, which is taken from our visit to the Jewish quarter in Marrakesh in Morocco, the Miara Jewish cemetery there has no tombstones at all. You can just see the separate graves. You can see where they are, but there's no tombstone. Strange thing in North London, the Hoop Lane Cemetery, for which I don't have a slide, in Golders Green, it was initially purchased by the Reform Synagogue of West London, but they sold the eastern half to London's Spanish and Portuguese Jews. And the result is that if you go to the Hoop Lane Cemetery, on one hand you'll have the European style of vertical gravestones, right next to it you'll have the Sephardi style, as you have seen in Marrakesh. The next slide is a sort of footnote to all of this. It comes from our visit to Berlin, where we saw the Berlin Holocaust Memorial. And having seen the Sephardi-style graveyards, Mount of Olives and the one in Marrakesh, it just struck me to wonder whether the design of the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin echoes in part the Sephardi style of Jewish graveyards. Well, apologies if you find this tour of Jewish cemeteries a rather strange topic. I've got a defence. Burial is the focus for our reading today from Torah. But also I would want to argue that caring for the dead is a significant mitzvah in Jewish tradition. The argument here being that if you're helping someone with no expectation of returning the favour. They're dead. And the mitzvah of caring for the dead has traditionally been organised in many Jewish communities, not left to the individual, been organised by the formation of burial societies. And in our visit to Prague, as the next slide shows, we saw in the Jewish Museum of Prague a sequence of paintings that show the traditional activities of a burial society. And if we have the next slide, the first from the Prague Burial Society, what's going on there in dress typical of the time, so not modern day, is a group of males, I think it's totally male, washing the body of the recently deceased, which is part of what a burial society does. Burial society activities are many: visiting the terminally ill, saying ritual prayers at the deathbed, washing the body, as you can see in the slide, making a shroud, wrapping the body, carrying the coffin to the cemetery, burial, and consoling the relatives of the deceased. I'll only stop for this picture of the ritual washing of the corpse, but I'd like to point out that the burial societies are not only a caring organisation, but they're also part of the social fabric of a synagogue. And if we move to the final slide, you can see that one of the paintings of the Prague Burial Society shows its members having a jolly good time in their annual banquet. Well, liberal Jewish synagogues tend to not have burial societies, but it's still quite a commonplace practice in other denominations. When Janet was a member of a Salt Lake synagogue that affiliated to both the conservative and also the reform movements, they had a burial society because of their affiliation to the conservative movement. And she was a member of the group that performed burial society functions for deceased female members of the congregation. I think burial societies are only one manifestation of the extent to which Judaism, as opposed to some other religions, has built many ritual practices around death. Jewish tradition dictates what the bereaved people should be doing at the moment of their loss, and then in the first week afterwards, and in the first month, and in the first year, and then on every anniversary of the death. So we might think that in this way, Judaism usefully offers a roadmap to the bereaved for the journey that they must take from their initial focus on an intensely personal loss to eventually fully rejoining the life of their community. For the community also, Judaism prescribes how to recognise the loss of a member and to accompany the personally bereaved. We would be attending a funeral, sitting shiva, attending the stone setting, observing yahrzeits. Because LJ synagogues don't have burial societies, some of that communal recognition of death and caring for the dead and caring for the bereaved has to take a different form. And I want to finish, you'll be glad to hear, by suggesting that that's the perspective from which it's proper to think about the KLS funeral scheme. Don't think of it as a personal service that's paid for in case you need it yourself. Think of it as a way in which, in this modern age, we can still practice the mitzvah of caring about and caring for those within our community who pass away.
Well, thank you, Vince. I thought that was very interesting. I hope everyone else did as well. And we will continue now with Misha Berach. Before we finish off with our concluding prayers, I'm just going to give Vince a moment to actually find Misha Berach. And while he's doing that, there's some people that I would like to think of while we're singing Misha Berach. And the version that we sing, the Debbie Friedman version, really talks about not just a physical healing, but a healing of the spirit and our own resolve to strengthen ourselves. So I'm thinking this week of Janos Gall, of my friends David and Michael Serkin-Poole in Seattle, Washington. I'm not much in a position to read anything that comes up. So if anyone is thinking about anyone and would like to put their names up, please, that way everyone will know who you're thinking of, and you should feel the comfort of, your other friends helping you to pray for the healing and the sustenance of those people. I know, and I should have written the names down, and I haven't, I've forgotten, but I know that Rebecca Singerman-Knight's partner's mother, I believe, is quite ill, and so we think of her, and we will join now in singing Misha Berach.
Misha Berach Avotenu Marcho Abracha Livotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha Berach Imotenu Marcho Abracha Lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
We continue now with our concluding prayers. So we turn to page 213 for the Chidi Chicago prayer. And then as we look towards that world that we're all trying to build, as the Misha Berach that we just sang said, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing. It's to build that world that Chidi Chicago envisions. And sadly, I don't think Vince is going to play it, so we're just going to read it. Page 213.
Can I just reassure Rebecca Singerman-Knight that that's not my opinion of the wonderful music she wrote?
No, he just didn't have a chance to practice it.
My ability to do its justice.
It's been one of those weeks. So 213. And then all that has divided us will merge, and then compassion will be wedded to power. And then softness will come to a world that is harsh and unkind. And then both men and women will be gentle. And then both women and men will be strong. And then no person will be subject to another's will. And then all will be rich and free and varied. And then the greed of some will give way to the needs of many. And then all will share equally in the earth's abundance. And then all will care for the sick and the weak and the old. And then all will nourish the young. And then all will cherish life's creatures. And then all will live in harmony with each other and the earth. And then everywhere we will be called Eden once again. We continue with the Kaddish. growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been, is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. Even when they are gone, the departed are with us, and they inspire us to live as in their higher moments they themselves sought to live. We remember them now, they remain in our hearts, and they are a continual blessing. And this Shabbat, we think particularly of Frank Kelly, the father of Seymour Kelly and the father-in-law of Liz, and the grandfather of Ethan and Joshua, of Abraham DeWolf, the grandfather of Nora Zimmerman, of Charles Warren, the father of Tammy Rich, and the grandfather of Tom, Emma, Joe, and Claire. I think it's also appropriate to remember at this time Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was buried earlier in the week on Sunday. And on this coming Friday is the Transgender Day of Remembrance. And so I think it's also possible to pause for a moment and reflect that there were 350 transgender people murdered this year, killed, just simply because they were trans. The average age of those is 31. The youngest was 15. For those for whom we have named, those whose, and I have a list of all their names, but I'm not going to read you 350 names. All those whose names we hold in our hearts, and all those for whom there was no one left to say Kaddish, we join together and say the Kaddish on page 524. Yitkedal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba, v'alma devrach yerutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon v'yomechon, v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, b'agala v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shemei Rabba mevorach le'olam l'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitalei v'yitalol shmei kudusha b'ruchu. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata, tishbachata v'nechemata, da'amiran v'yalma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shalom Rabba min Shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Osei shalom b'mramav, hu yasei shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yal kol b'nei Adam v'imru. Amen. And we are going to conclude today with Adon Olam. And I'm going to thank everyone who has joined us, whether members or those who might have joined us from other places in this country, possibly even elsewhere. I don't know. And I did read that some of you offered some kind words to those of us who are taking the service. So thank you for that as well. And again, my thanks to Craig, without whom, well, yeah, we would be completely and utterly and absolutely lost. So, Adon Olam.
One of the things we have to do now that we're live streaming services is make a note of whoever composed the music we're using, because they deserve some recompense, unless the music's out of copyright. This is out of copyright. This is the French Sephardic Adon Olam. Adon Olam Hashem Allah, b'terem kol yatzir nivra, v'eit nasa v'eftzol kol, adai melech shemo nikra, adai melech shemo nikra, v'akarei kiklot hakol, v'vado yimlok Torah, v'hu haya, v'hu hoeh, v'hu yiyeh, v'tifara, v'hu yiyeh, v'tifara, v'hu echad, v'ein sheni, v'ham shelo lahakbira. beli reshit, beli taklit, v'lo haz, v'ham Yisra, v'lo haz, v'ham Yisra, v'poeli, v'chayoli, v'tzuchev li, v'et Sarah, v'hodisi, umanos li, manat kosi, v'yom ekra, manat kosi, v'yom ekra, v'yado afidruki, v'et ishat ba'ira, v'imruki gaviati, Adonai li, v'lo ira, Adonai li, v'lo ira.
Shabbat shalom. By way of a final benediction, may the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing. Let us say, Amen.
Amen.
I believe we'll see you shortly on Zoom
For Kiddush.
for Kiddush.